Hello, dear Romanian fans of Francis Su. I'm Cătălina Bălan, Marketing and PR Director of Paralela 45 Publishing House in Romania, and I'm honored and delighted to salute you in the opening of our special discussion with American author Francis Su, based on the Romanian version of one of his bestseller books. You might have already guessed we will talk about Mathematics for Human Flourishing, first published at Yale University Press in 2020, and published in Romania at Paralela 45 Publishing House in 2021 in the translation of Dan Crăciun. I will not be long with the introduction, but before we give the floor to Monica Cure, who will be moderating the discussion, I'd like to introduce to you our special guests who will help us better understand why it is worth leaving out cliches and fears behind when it comes to understand mathematics and its role in our personal fulfillment. Francis Su, thank you so much for joining us today. As we speak, it is 8:30 a.m. in California, where you are currently based. And we can say you spend your breakfast time with us, and we couldn't be happier.
Thank you.
Francis Su is Benedictson Carva Professor of Mathematics at Harvey Mudd College, and the former president of the Mathematical Association of America. In 2013, he received the IMO Award, a nationwide teaching prize in the United States for college math faculty. In 2018, he won the Almost Ford Writing Award. His work has been featured in Quanta Magazine, Wired, and the New York Times. His book that we're talking about today, Mathematics for Human Flourishing, won the 2021 Euler Book Prize of the Mathematics Association of America. Mr. Su, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
Our next special guest, Monica Cure, is a Romanian-American writer, translator, and dialogue specialist. She holds a PhD in comparative literature from the University of Southern California in Los Angeles and has twice been awarded a Fulbright grant. Her poems and translations from Romania into English have been published internationally. She has lent her skills as a dialogue specialist to organizations such as the Los Angeles Change Collab, the Goethe Institute, and the Romanian-American Fulbright Commission. She also currently lives in Bucharest. I have to say that we owe a special thanks to Monica too, as she made this meeting possible, and also she was so kind to accept to moderate this meeting. Thank you, Monica.
Absolutely my pleasure. I'm very excited.
And last but not least, I am happy to present the book's translator in Romanian, Dan Crăciun, who is a professor. He studied philosophy at the University of Bucharest and got his PhD in ethics. He's now a retired professor after teaching classes in logic, philosophy of science, and business ethics, and also social psychology. He was also a visiting professor at Cambridge and Oxford University in the UK. He has published 9 books, many scientific studies, and he has translated almost 50 books. Also, it's worth mentioning that his daughter Irina is an assistant professor at Texas A&M University, where she teaches mathematics, by the way. So this being said, Monica, you've got the floor.
Great. Thank you so much, Cătălina. And thanks, everyone, for joining us. I'd love to just start out by full disclosure. The way that this happened was I actually knew Francis from Los Angeles. And when I saw that his book was translated into Romanian, it just was so fun to be able to have that connection. And I think one of the things that I really love about Francis's book about mathematics is that it is so personal, something that tends to surprise people when we're talking about mathematics. And Francis talks a lot about his story in the book, some of which I knew, some of which was new to me. And I would love to start off by asking you, Francis, just to say a little bit for people who haven't read the book, what inspired you to write this book and what did you hope to accomplish with writing the book?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks so much. And thanks for noticing the personal side of the book. In some ways, I like to say the book isn't really a math book. It's really a book about what it means to be a human being, using math as a lens. And so in part, my interest in writing a book like this was inspired by just the fact that when I think about what draws me to do math and what draws people in general to do math and to enjoy math, it seems like a lot of those things that are missing from the mathematical experiences people have in school. right? Like the fact that I enjoy working with people and solving problems together is often an aspect that isn't, it isn't cultivated in the classroom, where you often prize individual performance, and we don't prize mathematical communication. We only prize, problem solving, which is not a bad thing. That's a good thing, but it's not the only thing, I think, in mathematics. So that's really why I wrote the book, is to try to promote this idea that math is actually should be about being human, and promoting human virtues.
I think that's so beautiful. It's really, you can tell it's coming out of your own personal experiences, and that's what you're wanting to pass on to your students and beyond. So now I'd like to ask Don kind of what inspired him to want to translate this book. What is it that you felt a Romanian audience would really appreciate?
Well, I chose to translate the remarkable Francis's book for two main reasons, among others, of course. The first reason, after reading the introduction and the first two chapters, I told to myself, look, this guy wrote a book simply because he had something to say, not to show off as a polymath with literary talents. The text was crystal clear right from the beginning, and I felt instantly that I can translate this book with no struggle. The second, and maybe the more important reason, reading the book, I realized that despite some considerable differences between the American and Romanian educational systems, still there are certain essential similarities between them. I think the book tackles very actual and very urgent issues that we have in common with the rest of the world. So I thought maybe the few but the good people in Romania who are making serious, huge efforts to improve teaching math in our country deserve to have this remarkable book in Romania. So I started to work and I do not regret it at all.
Well, and we all get to benefit. I think that's the exciting part. I couldn't agree with you more, Don, on both of those points. Francis, it was just such a pleasure to read your writing. It's exactly as Don said. It's so clear. It's so personable. So it's a real joy. And the little I've come to know Don, I'm sure he's translated in that same style of kind of wanting to connect with the reader and be personable. And then, as Don was saying about some of the issues, I think, especially in education, it's something that we talk a lot about in Romania, the need for educational reform. I think, really soon coming up, there's going to be the college entrance exams. Students are already, thinking about how do I pass? How do I just get over this hump and then go on with the rest of my life on multiple subjects? So math, but not just, but definitely also math. So I would like to kind of now move towards talking about some of the similarities that I found and Don. I want to hear your perspective as well, some of the connections that you're finding in Francis, to see how you connect with some of the issues on the Romanian side. And of course, the book is so much more. So this is, for everyone that's watching, this is just a taste of Francis's book. It's relevant in so many different ways, but I've kind of selected 4 that I'd like us to talk about in the time that we have. And the first one, I think Don already kind of hinted to it. It's this idea that math is a performance. That's what math is supposed to be all about. It's how good are you at math? How many how well can you solve the problems? How can you perform? And that's something that having both the Romanian and the American experience, I really do, maybe even to a greater degree than America, connect to a kind of Soviet-influenced Eastern European way of looking at math. Dan, what are your thoughts? I mean, having been educated here and taught here.
Well, I'm a little bit surprised, your question. Yes, there is a myth about the Russian or Soviet math school in Romania. I'm not so sure about it, but one thing is absolutely certain. For the time being, the only purpose of the huge majority of students to study math is to pass the exams and to get some grades and some credentials. And the basic method to study mathematics in Romania still is to memorize formulas, to apply them hundreds and hundreds of times until you get trained somehow like an animal in the circus, who, after a very, very long uh, preparing process, drill process, is capable to amaze us doing certain things. But there are very few teachers in Romania. There are, but they are very few, the teachers who really try to find new ways to attract their students. And that means, in my opinion, to let them discover the reason why certain relationships should be grounded in our natural thinking. And it is also important, just 1 second, to explain certain theorems and demonstration, putting them into a historical context, making the pupils to learn about who was the creator, in what context he or she was working, and with what purpose.
So Don, let me summarize what I'm hearing you say, because that was a kind of a broad overview. What I'm hearing you say is that education in Romania, while you might not necessarily see it as a kind of, more drilling in math, it's fear-based, and it's not about explaining what the meaning is behind.
Not at all. That is why I was a very poor student in high school. And in order to pass my SAT, we have something similar with your SAT. I studied by myself for 2 months the textbooks, and I was then the mathematical explorer, as Francis says. I discovered the math by myself, and for the general surprise, in the end, at the written test, I've got an A, and at the oral examination, only a B. But it was more than expected by myself. And I began to be in love with mathematics after this personal effort to understand. I didn't.
Let's hear from Francis. How does that compare to your experience?
Yeah, I mean, I resonate with what you were just saying. That when you think about the kinds of things that we enjoy, like think of a hobby that you like to do. Whether that's gardening, whether that's sports, whether that's music.
Music.
Yeah, what draws you to that, right? It's not learning to play scales, right? It's hearing a symphony, right? And it's only after you experience a symphony that you may want to do the hard work of learning to play scales, or doing drills in football practice, right? You experience the thrill of the game first. So why are we not learning mathematics that way? People have such a bad impression generally of math, and they think of it as computation. They think of it as elitist, and that's I think a very impoverished view of what math can offer a human being.
Mm-hmm. And I think that there is, on the one hand, there's the misunderstanding of the perspective of math. And I think kind of tied with that is that, as you talked about in your book, Francis, the sort of performance-based approach to math. And that's something that I think will cripple the enjoyment of anything. So no matter how kind of easy it is to see the beauty of something, even something like music, if all you ever think about it is a way to look good in front of people, it becomes problematic. So how did you change the way that you looked at math, where it wasn't about performance?
Well, I have to say that for a long time, I did think about math as performance. I mean, I grew up learning math, having benefit of great math teachers and parents who cultivated that interest. I began to conflate my interest and ability in math with my love of math. And at some point, you get praised for it, and people start saying you're the best. It becomes a badge of honor in some ways. And it really wasn't until graduate school when I encountered people who were supremely talented in mathematics. I began to question my own place in math because I kept comparing myself to other people. And then, of course, being, as I describe a little bit in the book, being told that I didn't have what it takes to be a mathematician. I think that forced me to do some soul searching to try to understand, why is it that I want to do math, right? Is it because I want to get a PhD and be seen as the best? What does math have to offer everybody? And that's really, I think, the source of the struggle that I think ultimately led to writing a book like this.
Yeah, and I think that approach is so wonderful because it works both for people who feel like they're naturally gifted in math and kind of have that ability. It makes it so that the joy isn't taken away of doing math, and for people who might not necessarily immediately see the beauty in math, it's an encouragement that it's not about how good you are in math, and it really needs to be beyond the grade. And again, I kind of see, from what I've heard in the Romanian system and recently the Ukrainian system, in the way that drilling in math happens, and it's about being the best, that can be especially problematic.
I wonder if in Romania you have this phrase. In the US, people often say, "No, I'm not a math person," as if you're either born with mathematical talent or you're not. And in some sense, that automatically from the beginning forces people to think that they are fixed in either being a math person or not being a math person. Whereas, the approach I try to take in the book is that everybody's a math person. We all have basic human desires, and math can tap into those desires if we want to begin to see our mathematical natures.
Yes, indeed. Most people, not a lot of people, most people say like that. I'm not made by God for mathematics. The thing that bothers me, that too many say it with pride. They are proud not to be made by God himself for mathematics, and to confess a handicap and to be proud of it, it's something that I really cannot understand. I would accept if they would say humbly, "Unfortunately, I'm not good at mathematics," but too many people are very proud, not having any notion and no connection with mathematics.
So I am curious, Don, if you could say a little bit more about the educational system. The fact that I do know that students are tracked faster. So aren't there like mathematical high schools or high schools that are more technical in the Romanian school system?
Sorry, I have a cat here who is bothering me. Would you like to repeat the last sentence?
That's modern life right there. My question was if you could talk a little bit about the Romanian school system, in the sense of, aren't students fast-tracked in high school to go to more technical or mathematical high schools? Do you see that as a kind of division that happens earlier on?
Yes, there is such kind of division. I don't have precise figures, but I guess less than 10% of our high school students have a very clear idea about their future. So, hoping to be admitted at prestigious universities, not only here in Romania, but especially in the Western Europe, UK, and United States, they work hard, encouraged and supported by their families, not so much with their teachers, but with personal tutors. So they drill themselves a lot to get very high grades, knowing that the solution is to escape from Romania.
That's what I was talking about. See, that's what doesn't happen in the States. We don't hire well, no, that's not true. Sometimes Kumon, I guess that there are certain math schools, but here it is so common to get private math lessons. It's very much in the culture. But speaking of hard work, I do want to move to the next section that I'm seeing as a really strong parallel, in which we kind of look at some of the disciplines that math teaches us. And that's another thing that I really love about Francis's book, is the way that math and engaging in math helps you appreciate that hard work, appreciate the struggle. And I loved how Francis brings up the way that refusing that hard work is at the root of so many problems. And I was seeing specifically plagiarism, which is something that in Romania, as in the States, plagues our society. But in Romania, it's at a very high level. So we have lots of politicians who have plagiarized their works. It's been proven that they plagiarized their doctorates. It's very, very rampant, as is corruption as a whole. And it's very interesting to kind of see that refusal of hard work that you're talking about in your book, Francis, at the heart of that.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the issues with seeing math or seeing anything as a badge of honor or badge of elitism, is that if you begin to prize the achievement more than the actual internal goods that the subject itself offers, then you'll find other ways to get those goods, right? Like that's why people cheat. That's why people plagiarize, is because they want to be seen as intelligent or seen as smart, and that's more valuable to them than the actual internal rewards of mathematics or whatever discipline it is itself, right? Math builds in us creativity. It builds in us curiosity. When taught well, math should build in us an expectation of enchantment with beautiful ideas, right? These are the things that are fulfilling. These are the things that make your life richer. Those are the things, in fact, employers are looking for when they're hiring somebody with mathematical training. They're not hiring them because they know how to factor a quadratic. They're hiring them because they're looking for somebody who can be creative, who can think on their feet, who can solve problems that they've never seen before.
Mm-hmm. What do you think, Don? Is that something you feel is true in the Romanian context as well?
Well, the Romanian context is totally different in comparison with the United States. You see, after what we still call the Romanian Revolution in 1989, our country has been conquered and ruled by a gang of thieves, impostors, and crooks. And in the 19s, right after the revolution, we still had a good number of capable, decent, honest, and highly skilled people who were ready to get involved in rebuilding a modern and prosperous society in Romania. But the political parties and the political leaders despised them, discouraged them, even rejected them. So in the end, after about 7, 8 years, most of them gave up, abandoned politics. Some of them are still very successful in business, and a huge number of brains left Romania for good, trying to build a career and making a new life in somewhere else, all over the world.
I have to agree with you. That is, in one way, one of the big differences. That there isn't that same sense where in America, whether, to different degrees, if you work hard, you'll achieve something. That is, right, the story of America and the American dream. In Romania, there isn't a sense of that. There isn't a feeling of necessarily if you work hard, you'll actually be able to achieve the thing that you want. But I think paradoxically, Dan, I think that's where Francis's point becomes even stronger. So if you're working hard, if you're doing the work for the sake of the work, for the sake of the goodness of it, then it becomes worth it. And you can resist longer. You can say, okay, maybe I'm not able to make the amount of money I'd like to make, but it still matters to me that I do this right. And I think that's something that's very powerful.
One of the stories I tell in the book is of a Japanese American who was imprisoned, interned during World War II because he was Japanese, and an artifact from that period was a game that he developed, which he used to occupy himself and his children. Right? There's an example of mathematical thinking serving the effort of helping somebody flourish, even in difficult circumstances, even though they were imprisoned against their will.
Yes, but unfortunately, these are exceptions. And because I read Karl Popper, I disagree with that old dictum, exception that enforces the rule. There is one exception can break the rule and make it just a statistical generalization or frequency. So even Christopher, your surprise character in your book, is an exception. So don't you think that maybe you're a little bit too idealistic, imagining that a large number of people after reading your book will change their ways and will study mathematics or music or sport or anything else just for the love of it, just to enjoy the pleasure of being good at doing something? I'm a little bit skeptical. I agree that the number can be increased, but I don't think that will live enough to see a majority of people who are looking for intrinsic pleasure and joy of doing something very, very well and feeling the pleasure of the skill of mastership.
Let's hear from you, Francis. How do you respond?
That's a great question. Yeah, I admit that in some ways I might be projecting a certain idealism, but I do think that that's part of the reason. I mean, I'd be very happy. Like, my goal is not to create more mathematicians or create more math majors. My goal is to help everybody see a side of themselves that they didn't see before, and that's why the book is written in a popular way towards a very general audience, hoping potentially to reach people who don't see themselves as math people.
If I may step in, excuse me for a second. I'd like to say that reading this book that I discovered a few weeks ago, I thought that if I had it while I was a teenager, I sure would have loved math more, because I was very afraid until recently of mathematics, and I thought that it's because of my professors and because of their approach to mathematics that I had this reaction. So frankly, I believe that the existence of this book is a great premise to just give a chance to students to actually at least forget for a second their fear and try to understand mathematics differently.
Yeah, I think that to be a teacher, you have to have a dose of idealism. You have to believe that, okay, you might not be able to change everybody's life, but it's worth it, even for one person who looks at things differently. Which brings me to the third connection that I see very clearly. And that is this idea that math, one of the things that math really does well is brings home that, okay, no matter what everyone else believes, there is something that is true. There is something that is permanent. Math reveals that you can't just decide one day that 2 + 2 = 5. And that is so important, I think, today in some of the ways that Francis talked about in this book, which fake news absolutely has hit Romania very hard, especially during the pandemics. With Russia being on the border, there are definitely very coordinated attempts to influence the way that people think. So some of the things that are inherent in the research involved in math and looking at numbers and knowing how to interpret them continue to be so important, maybe more than ever.
Yeah, and of course, you know, the U.S. is no stranger to corruption at high levels of government, as you know, and you know the whole, I think the whole issue with fake news has just I think revealed a side of the importance of mathematical thinking, right? Like I'm very careful to say that yes, you know, when you try to understand what's true, there's lots of ambiguity, there's lots of, you know, potential perspectives on a truth, but that doesn't deny the fact that there isn't some whole truth to be understood and discovered. And math builds, hopefully, mathematical training builds in us an ability to look and see, like, hey, you know, is it reasonable that an election could have been stolen, right? The way that you know, many Americans feel about the last election. Is it? Can you cut through some of the noise and be able to say, yeah, actually, this is actually likely, and this other thing is not likely, right? This is mathematical thinking, I think, at its best when it helps us to actually decide what's possibly true and what's not.
Mm-hmm. That's excellent. Dan, what are some of the ways that you're seeing that kind of mathematical thinking gaining importance in Romania today?
Well, you said something about statistics. Honestly, I don't know much about statistics, but I translated Daniel Kahneman's masterpiece, Thinking Fast and Slow, where he explains why and how our natural thinking is not at all very well equipped to understand and apply statistics properly. But I don't see statistics as the source, the main source of the problem with fake news, this avalanche of lies that so many people, too many people, are ready to believe. I think the root cause is the general ignorance. I don't have at hand the figures, but I was shocked and amazed learning how many Romanians still believe the earth is flat, or that that humans were contemporary with the dinosaurs. And some people either ignore completely or reject the theory of evolution for religious reasons. So
Right.
they have no idea about physics, mathematics, and they simply cannot understand any argument or scientific explanation, but they think
Understand,
just
or they don't want to. I want to clarify. Do you think that they are not capable of understanding, or is there something else?
they are not capable and not willing to understand, because it's so much easier to believe all these stories that are presented by fake scientists and authorities, imposters, and they think they can understand easier these stories because they simply don't have the basics of scientific.
Right there. I think that's what you're. I think what you're really trying to say is that there's not a kind of rigorous thinking about these subjects because it's easier. And I would posit that that's where the mathematical thinking comes in. And personally, I don't believe that math and faith are opposed. In fact, that kind of questioning that is necessary for real faith in anything is precisely that the spirit of investigation that I think, Francis, you were talking about in your book.
Yeah, I mean,
critical thinking, just a second, because when I was teaching at the university, I had enormous difficulties to determine my students to ask questions, to engage a dialogue with me, because they were not trained all along from the first grade up until their senior year in high school. They were not used to answer questions, to question the truth of what the teacher is trying to explain. And I felt they were frightened to question what I was telling.
To do as well. They don't know how to do it if we scare them, if we're not open to it. But Francis, how have your experiences?
Certainly in every area of life, I think it's valuable and important to learn to ask questions and to seek out the answers and not just go on blind authority and trust people just because they seem to be experts. And that that's true even in my own personal faith when I think about the ways that I am challenged to ask questions and to reason, right? To use the capacities that I have to make sense of the world and everything in it, and that goes for mathematics as well.
Wonderful.
Absolutely.
So the very last time connection that we have time for, I think, is one of the most important, to be honest. Francis, I absolutely love that you talk about the need for justice in teaching mathematics. And how many people don't see themselves as math people, not because of any kind of innate ability, but because of the ways that they are not welcomed, not brought into situations where they can flourish in that way. And I will say for Romania, I definitely think that there are some parallels. It's a diverse country, but in different ways. And I think that primarily the students who have not had the same opportunities of being welcomed into math, I think are students from rural environments and also Roma students. I think that's a very big need for justice in Romania. And then recently I spoke with a student who had disability issues. That's another huge problem, I think, that Romania is barely starting to acknowledge in the educational system.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, this is, again, related to the question of what you think math is for, right? Like, if you think math is for getting a good job or skills, then people think of it as competitive, and they think of it as, well, one person does well in math means another person falls behind, right? Whereas if you think about mathematics as a public good, a social good that everybody deserves to have a chance to experience, then that's a completely different way of thinking. You'll begin to see math as something that belongs to everybody, and everybody should have a chance to at least see the beauty of. Just like we'd want people to see, the beauty of music, or to experience the thrill of a sports game, right? Everybody should have a chance to experience mathematical thinking in that way as well.
I think that's so true. When we see people as less than, it's exactly as you're saying. We think, well, why would they need that? Why would they need to know that? That's not something that is going to be helpful to them. And I think it's exactly that sort of thinking that gets in the way.
And math sometimes suffers from the fact that it is so useful. It is useful, yes, but that's not the way you get people to get excited about it, everyone to get excited about it.
Mm-hmm. Just one last thing before we have to end, Francis. I just precisely on this issue, I want to hear what is something recently that happened, maybe on a more systemic level, that you feel is giving you hope about justice in math and in education.
You mean here in the U.S.?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Well, I do see more and more professional mathematicians speaking about the importance of math for everyone. That gives me hope in a way that I didn't see it 20 years ago. And I think partly that comes out of the fact that many inequities are now being much more clearly revealed, and people seeing that it can be harmful actually to have this view of math as an elitist profession.
Wonderful. So it's really raising awareness that is the beginning of change. And Francis, clearly your book has contributed to that. Clearly you and your service to the profession, I have no doubt that you are part of that change. And so thank you for that. And thank you for writing this book that, thank you to Don, is now available. And thank you to Cătălina and Paralela 45 for publishing it. So I'll turn it back over to Cătălina.
Okay.
Oh no, we can't hear you.
Oh my God, I was on mute. 2 years of pandemics and I still forgot to unmute myself. Sorry. I was saying that I'm very, very honored. We all are very honored that our publishing house to have had the possibility to talk to Francis Su and to talk to you, Monica Cure and Dan Crăciun. We'll be extremely excited to make this video public to your Romanian readers, Mr. Su. We'll get back with a link, and I'll just mention that for those watching us, who will be watching us shortly, that they can buy this book, Mathematics for Human Flourishing, or as it says in Romanian, Matematică, Pentru, împlinirea, ființei, umane, on our website, paralela45.com, or on the website of our partner, într-o. Also, we will be happy to donate 10 copies of this book on behalf of the author and of the publishing house, of course, and we will announce on our Facebook page, where the copies will be sent. We'll have a list. Thank you again all very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for your invitation.
Thank you very much.